Good morning. You're locked in live, and I'm your host, Algenon Cash. That's right. You're back for another episode. We ask that you every Sunday morning tune out all the noise and join us right here on WTOB at 8 a.m. for Locked In Live. So glad to have you all back with us once again. I think I've got a really exciting show for you. I'll be interviewing WXII news anchor Briana Conner about a story that she recently reported on. And then on the back half of the show, I'll have Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board Chair Malishai Woodbury. She'll be updating us on what's going on with schools now that the governor has issued some guidelines to school districts all around the state. But before we get started, I just want to talk to you a little bit about sort of an important story that I've been following as we're getting ready to go into this next week. Congress will be they will be going back into session on Monday, July 20th. And I think one of the most important things that they're going to be talking about is another round of funding for state and local government. They are going to be debating another stimulus package that could provide checks to individuals and families that are still struggling as it relates to COVID-19. And I cannot stress enough how important it is for Senator Tillis and Senator Burr to get with their colleagues in the Senate and really encourage them to support state and local government. And I think as we get more into our conversation with School Board Chair Malishai Woodbury this morning, you're going to quickly understand why that's such an important need. But it's so important also that my listeners and those that are joining us today on Facebook Live, that they also reach out to their congressmen, men and women, that they reach out to their senators and really encourage them to support state and local government. It's absolutely critical. The other item that they're going to be talking about as they resume the session this upcoming week is they'll be debating whether or not to extend another round of federal unemployment benefits to so many individuals that are still out of work. And I want to just say that, this is an issue that I've been watching very carefully. I know that I've made some comments on Facebook, some that have maybe been taken a little bit out of context. But I do think it's important that we continue to support those individuals and families in need. But it's so important that we also do it in a way that really incentivizes and encourages people to return to work. And so I've been talking with some of the men and women in Congress about this issue. And I know one of the things that they're going to be looking at is possibly extending the federal benefit for individuals, but also maybe looking at tying it to returning to work. So in other words, if you actually return to work, you'll be able to get the federal benefit as a bonus, which I think is very interesting. So keep your eyes on that this week as they resume session. And then also one other item that I'm really championing for, I really believe that we've got to be looking hard at some kind of an infrastructural spending bill. I think one way to mobilize a large amount of dollars into our economy and stimulate our economy fast would be to look at our crumbling roads and bridges, our highways, our airports, our schools. And I think this is an area where the federal government could step in a very large way, provide stimulus to state and local governments for those kind of projects, which would end up getting a lot of people back to work and getting them back to work quickly. So just keep your eyes on the congressional session. As I stated, it does resume on Monday. I'm working with a group to put together a press conference on Tuesday with some mayors around the state, as well as some local business leaders. And again, we're going to be calling on our senators, Senator Tillis and Senator Burr, to be reaching out to Senator McConnell and their other colleagues, again, encouraging them to support not only individuals and families, but small businesses, state and local governments that are finding it very hard to navigate through this pandemic. So with that said, I want to go ahead and jump into the show here. Ms. Conner, how are you doing this morning?
Hey, good morning. I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. So as I stated, we've got Ms. Briana Conner, who is a news anchor with WXII Channel 12 News. And so if you have not seen her, I encourage you to watch. Ms. Conner, when can my listeners catch you on the news?
Every weekday, typically Monday through Friday at 5 and 10 on the Triad CW, and then at 11 back over on WXII 12.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for joining us this morning and providing us with some insight. I was really encouraged and intrigued by a news story that you recently reported on. And for those of my listeners that may not know, Ms. Conner recently did a story where she talked about bars, and some bars that are open and some that are shut down. and just basically the uneven enforcement related to the governor's order. And I thought it was really intriguing because it told a great story about a man named Mr. Taylor down in Lexington who has shut his bar down. But at the same time, we've got bars right here in our backyard that are continuing to operate and do very well. And so this story, I've been keeping up with it on Facebook. The story has already surpassed 5,000 views. So Ms. Conner, you've got to be proud of the work you just did. What prompted and motivated you to report on this story?
Well, first, thank you for those kind comments about my work. But, you know, I work at WXII, but I also live in this community. This is where I've called home for about 5 years now. So I was noticing just a lot of things that seemed uneven when it comes to enforcement, as you were saying. So I would go out and I would be at a restaurant and I would look next door and see a bar open, and much of it rather just wasn't necessarily making sense with what I was reporting on the news every day, which was Governor Cooper has asked and mandated that all bars close to slow the spread of this virus. So that wasn't connecting with what I was seeing in our triad community. So I thought it was something that needed to be looked into.
Well, as many of my listeners know, I'm really involved with the Triad Food and Beverage Coalition, which is a local restaurant association that I helped to launch at the outset of COVID-19. And I would agree with you. I think not only are the governor's orders, we could debate the merits of them, and I do think they are required in order for us to protect our customers and our employees. So I see the need for them. But I think a lot of us get frustrated when sometimes these orders are not enforced evenly, and you've got some small business owners that are being forced to shut down because of them. Can you tell my listeners a little bit about, what did you really learn? I mean, what I thought was really interesting about your story is that it was really in depth, provided a lot of context. You gave a lot of backstory. I mean, you provided information from ALE. So it sounded like you really had to work hard on this. What did you walk away feeling like you learned in the whole process?
Yeah, my goodness, I learned so much about the restaurant industry, the bar industry, the government. I mean, it's really complex. And I think your average citizen, your average even journalist kind of would have no idea what's going on and what all of this means unless you really spent some time with it. So that's what I did. And I was able to find that, in essence, the text of the governor's order is open to interpretation. The ABC Commission in North Carolina is able to help business owners interpret whether or not they're acting as a bar or restaurant or eating establishment, which is a whole nother category. And then from there, the ALE, of course, is the kind of the policing arm of the ABC. So they would have the power to go in and try to see whether or not someone was following the rules and then take action based on that. And then you also have, of course, your local law agencies that can take some action if somebody's operating outside of the governor's order. But again, the text is what it is. That text is open to interpretation. And I think that's what's allowing a lot of the gray area to where two bars with the same exact permit from the state, one can say, well, I'm allowed to be open right now. And one can say, I'm having to close my business and we can't make it right now. So this isn't as cut and dry as I think the governor would have us believe. It's not as cut and dry as maybe some people, in the community would have us think. But I think what's really obvious is that a lot of these business owners, bar owners are just trying to make it. They want to make a living. They want to support themselves. They want to support their families. And so they're doing what they can in that aspect. And then on the other hand, there's the public health aspect where people at DHHS and on the government's end really want to tamp down on this virus, on transmission, so that hopefully everyone eventually can open up and we can figure out a way to live with this virus.
If you're just now joining us, you're locked in live. I'm your host, Algenon. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm speaking with Miss Briana Conner, who is a news anchor with WXII, our local Channel 12 News. She just recently did an interesting report on the bars that are still currently closed compared to those that are operating right now. And if you have not been able to watch that story, I would encourage you to either go to WXII.com and pull it up there, or you can also find Ms. Conner on Facebook, and the story is available for you there. It's already gotten well over 5,000 views, so that just tells you how interested a lot of people are in the report. So, Ms. Conner, as we get ready to close, I can imagine this story has a lot of legs to it. Where do you see your reporting going next? I mean, are you thinking about a follow-up story to further tell the story about Mr. Taylor, or possibly going in new directions?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, Taylor's Tavern in Lexington, he has decided to close his business. He just couldn't deal with the uncertainty of, okay, maybe in 3 more weeks we'll open, maybe we'll move into phase 3 at such a point in time. So he shut down. I'll be keeping in touch with him to find out what he does, but also trying to stay in tune with some of these new ways that our leaders are trying to come up with to keep people safe again and limit transmission of the virus. So I understand that in places like Orange County already, and Durham, and possibly coming up next week in Charlotte, they're passing a new order really locally in these jurisdictions that disallows restaurants, bars, anybody to serve alcohol after 10 o'clock at night. And so that's interesting to me to see whether or not that could be something that happens in the triad. Looking at a lot of things, because again, I think there's just a gap between the intent of these laws and these orders and the impact and controlling the virus. So people are getting really creative, coming up with new ways again, looking at what may be happening in Raleigh with allowing maybe some bar owners to do mixed beverages to go, to give them some income right now if they're not going to be allowed to open up. So it's all interesting to me. And as I've learned more about it, I've again just become more interested in it. So this is definitely not something I'm going to drop anytime soon.
Well, Ms. Conner, we appreciate your reporting, and I'm certain there'll be a lot more to talk about as we continue forward. I enjoy watching you on WXII, so just keep up the great work and keeping our community informed. I encourage my listeners, if you're not watching WXII, go check out Ms. Briana Conner. She's on Monday through Friday, anchoring the evening and nightly news. Ms. Conner, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
All right, you too. All right, so again, if you're just joining us, you are locked in live. I am your host, Algenon Cash, and we just finished a really good discussion with WXII news anchor Briana Conner. So again, if you have not seen the story about the bars that are opening and some that are shutting down, I would encourage you to go to WXII.com and check out that story, or you can also go on Facebook and you can find that story on her Facebook page. But as we move into the second half of my conversation, I've got a really good friend of mine, Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board Chair, Malishai Woodbury. I had the pleasure of interviewing Ms. Woodbury on the Chronicle Live about a week or so ago. And she was so gracious to also join us and my listeners here on WTOB for some updates on what's happening with our local education system. And Ms. Woodbury, I would think that you're a busy lady right now. You're probably one of the hardest working community leaders that we have. You finally got some guidance from the governor the other day on what he's going to allow for the school system. So why don't we start there? Just maybe give my listeners an idea of what the governor's decision was and what impact does that have on our local school system and kids and parents and so forth.
Yes, thank you. And good morning to you, Brother Cash, and to your listeners, and congratulations on so many of the wonderful things that you're doing also in our community as an established leader. And I would like to definitely just thank you and so many of the other folk in media for allowing us these opportunities to try to reach out to a larger audience, to try to help explain what's going on, because, you know, we are in, you know, times that definitely no one could have ever prepared, anticipated. And I know that a lot of people are, you know, at least stressed, if not just outright scared about where we are and how we will reopen schools safely. And so, of course, this week the governor expressed the guidelines by which all schools in North Carolina would have to operate based on where our state is with the COVID-19. And essentially, the guidance is school districts will operate up under a Plan B phase, which essentially Plan B is a very precautious face-to-face and with a mix of what we call remote and virtual. And so remote isn't virtual, but inside of a remote learning, there is virtual capacity. So nevertheless, that's the baseline. That's what the governor expects pretty much all of us as school districts to operate within. However, the other part of his guidance was about, if districts feel like they do not have the capacity to bring in students in a precautious way, then we need to look at, and we have the authority to exist in Plan C, which is all remote. And so that would, or in an all virtual space. And so that would mean that, probably, for example, in a school district, maybe the cases in that county much higher than, the average in North Carolina. So they do not see that opening would be at all in a safe way. And I know we have not gotten to this point yet, Cash, but another reason why a district may decide, well, we're going to stay virtual is because we don't have the monies yet to pay for the equipment that we need to, make our staff safe. So it's, the guidance, I think, is, what it is. The governor has spoken and the school districts will comply. And that's what Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools right now, we're scheduled to meet tomorrow at 1 p.m. And our superintendent will, have a recommendation for us based on the guidelines of Governor Cooper.
Well, thank you for providing that context. And I can imagine, maybe you can speak a little bit to this, Ms. Woodbury. There's an interesting option that you have here, right? So you've got Plan B that's going to cost an exorbitant amount of money. I've heard as much as $45 million to be able to implement because of additional training, staff, equipment, transportation costs, food-related costs, you name it. But then you've also got Plan C, which is the virtual academy, which I think would also result in the school system having to furlough or lay off a large number of staff, whether it be, bus drivers and coaches and all types of teachers. And I do want to remind my listeners this morning that the Winston-Salem Forsyth County school system is the 5th largest employer in the county. And so we are going through a really interesting time with our local economy, with unemployment being high, sales tax collection is down. And so, I also think we're in this era or this phase right now where we certainly don't want even more people unemployed. So, help me to understand, or help our listeners to understand, Ms. Woodbury, how do you wrestle between those two different options? You got one option that's a $45 million price tag, and you've got another option that only adds to the economic pain that we're in here locally right now.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, what must be considered in, this equation is, bringing folk back safely within the risk of COVID, airborne type virus. And so the possibility of anybody being sick or, God forbid, death is, it's a hard way of which way we're going to go, and I would assume most districts that just want to say, hey, until we, exist in an environment where there's better treatment or a vaccine, we're just going to go with the virtual component, of course, then you're again considering that furlough and people out of jobs, but also, those children that we know since March that had access to devices, 8,000 never logged on, and they were primarily in a concentration of Winston-Salem that I'm fortunate enough to represent as a servant leader on District 1, and those are the students that were already behind. And so I can imagine a whole year's worth of virtual with them. We're probably talking about 10 to 12,000. Those students, just by way of proportionality, make up a third of our district. So, you know, that would put them at roughly 28,000 students, 10,000 not logging on. I mean, we're getting into a situation at that point where that's another pandemic. And so this is not a time, and I don't want to get too serious, Cash, because I want you to ask me some other questions, and I don't want to put fear in. But I just want this community to know that at this time, we just really need the community to, you know, continue to send us their thoughts, their suggestions, their encouragement, and just know that, you know, this is not a political issue. This is life and death on so many different levels, and it's about the progress of a society that, you know, if we the 5th largest school district, well, if we the 5th largest employer in the community, then laying off significant number of folk will impact our community. And, you know, we need to start having those serious conversations if that's the path that we're going to take. And if we have to go that to work with community folk to figure out how to lessen the impact on our community. But, you know, we got some hard decisions to make, Cash, and I will hope by tomorrow, you know, the superintendent give us a plan that, you know, we can move forth on in a safe way and, you know, continue to help strengthen Winston-Salem, Forsyth County.
No, I think you're right. I think I read, if I'm not mistaken, that Guilford County has opted to go completely virtual. I think they're going to give it more time before they decide whether or not they want to go with the Plan B option. But I also, to some degree, agree with you, Ms. Woodbury. I think you've got a situation where for a lot of students, if they're not in front of a teacher, if they're not in that classroom, if they don't have that supervision and that accountability, they just choose not to learn. And that's a very unfortunate thing. I think so much about my own story. I certainly would not be where I'm at today if it wasn't for education. I grew up extremely poor, wrong side of the city, as they would say. But my grandparents always stressed to me that education was going to be the thing that allowed me to transition and to have upward mobility and grow. And so I think it's critical that we do all that's necessary to make sure those kids that are often underserved, that we don't forget about them. And, you know, one other thing that I have a deep concern about that maybe you can speak to, Ms. Woodbury, is you coined the phrase the other day when we were on the Chronicle Live, the digital divide. You know, not everyone has access to Wi-Fi and the right technology and the right devices and, you know, those types of things to be able to, you know, opt to go virtual, or either maybe you don't have a parent that can just stay home or, you know, quit their job. You may not be in an economic situation. So there's also an economic divide. How much did that play into the decision making for you all on the board as it relates to which plan to go to? I mean, did you take in consideration that digital and economic divide?
Oh, absolutely. The digital divide, as I just explained, is even deeper than children having the actual access, because technical literacy is, you know, is different than just, I know how to get on my cell phone and go to Facebook. I know how to go to my Twitter account. I always tell students, don't let the smartphone, quote unquote, outsmart you. You are in control of the phone. It is a tool for you to become more aware, and how you utilize it can yield you benefits. But, you know, if you depended upon it to make you a very literate, conscientious adult, it doesn't do that, right? And so for our students to And parents to be literate as it relates to technology means also that not only do I have my device and I have internet access, but when teachers send some stuff home about logging in with some kind of account and a Canvas student ID or state ID, and oh boy, what is, I have problems keeping up with my 4-digit passcode logging into my cell phone. And it's a 12-digit long number that the state gives students that you got to use to log in to Canvas or the Power School infrastructure. I'm telling you, I worked in Gifford County Schools on a technology, what we call personalized learning team, which was Gifford County's goal to use a one-to-one personalized learning technology project with our middle schools. And some days I would spend half of a day getting kids logged in, and I'm the professional trained in. I got people at the state online with me trying to figure out the glitch in their number. So imagine if I'm a parent and I can't get my child logged in because what is your Power School ID? And then for some technical reason, it doesn't work. It becomes at that point, just get in your coloring book and your crayon, sit down and be quiet or something like that. And so that digital divide is about the actual access, and it is also about the knowledge base that our students and parents have to have on their own to be able to engage effectively with the teacher and the curriculum. And that is very problematic, not just for Black and brown and poor children, but also other families that's just not used to this new normal yet, right? So I can anticipate that this digital divide is going to create more problems that ultimately we, preparing for. But at the end of the day, I think the major burden will lie on underserved families, Black, brown, poor families will, definitely, continue to, regress up under this banner. And if we go all virtual, that's, our society needs to prepare for the repercussions of that.
Yeah, and as my good friend Representative Montgomery, he always likes to remind people that you're always coming into contact with somebody that's a product of your school system. Whether that's inside of a restaurant or at the bank or the doctor's office. Wherever you go, right, even inside the gas station. So it's so critical important that we have a strong education system, and we not forget about those kids that are oftentimes on the fringes. If you're listening, if you're just not joining us, you are locked in live. I'm your host, Algenon Cash. Every Sunday morning at 8 a.m., I ask you to just tune out all the other noise. Join us here at WTOB for a discussion, typically about topics that are most important to the public. And this morning, we do have Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board Chair Malishai Woodbury just giving us an update on what's going on with the schools and what you can expect this upcoming school year. So, Ms. Woodbury, I probably got time for one more question. We've talked a little bit about the digital divide, the economic divide. We've also talked about the impact of some of the plans and guidelines that the governor has issued. Let's talk about safety on this last question. I know one of the big concerns from a lot of parents is just safety. What happens if we see an outbreak in one of these schools? What's going to be the emergency response? What are we going to be doing to make sure that teachers and children that may be at high risk are some kind of way not left out the equation? What is the board and also the school superintendent, what conversations are you all having about keeping teachers and students and even parents safe?
So that's the number one priority. As we started to go down this path regarding how we would reopen schools, everything was based about, can we keep children and staff safe? So that was just the number one priority. We brought in experts to talk us through based on, the scientific guidelines regarding certain thresholds you need to even be up under to, open up different types of businesses and institutions and organizations. safety was first. It still is first. What I will say is this, that, you know, the risk of bringing in, you know, teachers and students into the building in a COVID-19 environment is real. And I would not be, you know, an honest woman if I said, oh no, we got the right number of equipment to secure your safety. There's no way you can catch it, you know, by coming into our schools because we have all of the proper equipment. That's just not a reality. So there is a risk coming into our schools right now to learn. And so parents then and our teachers can make the decision if we go to plan B. This is if, I'm gonna say if we go to a plan B, to say, I want to work remotely. I want to go to the virtual academy. So, you know, there are options because we know that it is a real risk. And but the state has mandated that every school create a safety plan, and it has to be approved. And, you know, all school districts, like you just went through those scenarios, Cash, we have to be able to identify if somebody is exposed on site, you know, what are precautions. We have to have a quote unquote mobile healthcare center that we send those folk to and kind of isolate them and get somebody there. So, you know, it's I always say it's above my pay grade. Thank God I got a superintendent and she thinks through all of that stuff. But if we open up, before anybody comes into those buildings, they will have had the training and know what the protocols are.
Well, Ms. Woodbury, thank you for that. I know we're pretty much out of time, and we really appreciate you joining us this morning. Appreciate your service, and I know you all have some really tough decisions ahead of you. I certainly would not want to be in your position, and not at this moment, not at all. But we'll be praying for you all, and you know, supporting y'all as best as we can. And I also want to thank the listeners who joined us this morning. Every Sunday morning, 8 a.m. right here on WTOB, you lock in live. I'm your host, Algenon Cash, and I just want to leave you all with something. One of the real key things about being locked in is being able to make tough decisions. And I think Ms. Woodbury talked a lot about that this morning. And, you know, when you're focused, when you're passionate about something, when you're determined about something, in order to be a strong leader, you got to be able to take on the tough challenges, and you got to be able to make decisions. You have to be decisive. And sometimes when you make decisions, you're not necessarily going to please everyone. And there's going to be people out there that question you and criticize you, but you've got to be able to lock in on what it is that you're trying to do, what it is that you're trying to achieve, what your goals are, and you just got to push forward with that conviction. So again, thank you for joining me. Please meet me back here next Sunday morning, 8 a.m. right here on WTOB. Y'all stay locked in.